This idea that the Republican Party is no longer a welcoming place for conservatives and conservatives are opposed to it, not part of it. That is kind of the tune, or at least the tone, of a lot of the reaction on the political right to what happened in that election last night. And it started on the national conservative media even before the final results were in last night.
Have not been inspired by Republicans in Washington. You went as far earlier this week and late last week to suggest that if the Republican Party doesn't get their act together, you would consider moving third party. Explain.
Well, if Republicans are going to act like Democrats, then what's the use in getting all gung-ho about getting more Republicans in there? We're going to be a bankrupt, fundamentally transformed country unless those who know what they're doing and aren't going along just to get along with those in power, it being today the Democrats, that does no good. So, yeah, if Republicans aren't going to stand strong on the planks in our platform, then it does no good to get all enthused about them anymore.
It does no good to get all enthused about them anymore, those Republicans who are so terrible. And I should say that Governor Palin has made noises in the past about leaving the Republican Party. A couple of weeks ago, she said it was the issue of immigration that she said was, quote, just about driving me to renounce my Republican ties. Last year on the Fox News channel, she also said she would consider joining something called the Freedom Party. Bad lighting here, but check it out.
That much of that party, the Freedom Party, and if the GOP continues to back away from the planks in our platform, from the principles that built this party of Lincoln and of Reagan, then yeah, more and more of us are going to start saying, you know, what's wrong with being an independent? I think there will be a lot of us who start saying, GOP, if you abandon us, well, we have nowhere else to go except to become more independent.
A declaration of Tea Party independence, conservative independence. They will leave the Republican Party and form, I don't know, maybe the Freedom Party, something else, some third entity. This has been sort of a hobbyist, empty threat rattling around on the political right now and again for the past few years. But it's spiking right now. After what just happened in Mississippi, this is now what they are talking about it. This is what they're talking about on the right, and these are the terms they're talking about it in. Mark Levin, the conservative radio host, said this on Twitter. D.C. Republican Party may have finally angered conservatives beyond repair. Over at Red State, the editor Eric Erickson there says, quote, I continue to oppose a third party, but he says the Mississippi race does crystallize for me the desires of many to start a third party. He says the problem for those who call themselves Republicans is that it is harder and harder to say exactly what a Republican is these days. I'm just not sure what the Republican Party really stands for anymore. This becomes a longer-term problem for the Republican Party. Its core activists hate its leadership more and more. It's a system that cannot perpetuate itself. Grassroots activists feel further and further removed and alienated from the Republican Party. And then he says this. When the GOP inevitably caves on repealing Obamacare, we may just see an irreparable split. And even worse, he says, if party leaders and party base voters cannot reconcile themselves to a common candidate in 2016, God help us. The conservative newspaper, The Washington Times, today circulated an email blast that went out overnight from the head of the group that's called the Tea Party Nation. It included this. When the Republican establishment acts like Democrats, what is the point of supporting them? The answer is we don't have to. The Republican establishment thinks they've fought back an insurrection in Mississippi from conservatives, and now we will meekly fall in line in November and support a rhino, a Republican in name only. He responds to that by saying never. And it's not just these national voices up close to this fight in Mississippi. In Mississippi specifically, Tea Party leaders there telling reporters that the Republican Party in Mississippi is now, quote, badly hurt by this fight. The chairman of the South Mississippi Tea Party tells Politico, quote, it makes you want to quit being involved. I never believed a third party would work. But maybe that's the only way to get rid of the corruption of Washington. Schism. It's not just for breakaway forms of Protestantism anymore. It has been an amazing and illuminating thing to watch the establishment versus Tea Party fight over these past few years. But today, the side that sees itself as anti-establishment sort of appears to be giving up on the Republican Party. Maybe they'll leave it. Maybe they will start their own.
Washington, D.C. is not a place of a representative government anymore. It is a place of aristocracy. That's all it is. George Washington warned us. This is not a Tea Party. This is George Washington. And if you would like to go down and throw George Washington under the bus, go ahead. But I will never do it. George Washington warned us. The two-party system will be the death of us.
Now, is anybody actually throwing George Washington under the bus? But if so, right-wing talk radio hosts will refuse to go along with that quietly. Sheeple. It's amazing. Amazing. So no. The national reaction to Chris McDaniel losing this race against Thad Cochran, it has been for Tea Party supporters and their biggest political celebrity voices to start talking about leaving the Republican Party. That has been the reaction on the right today. It's been amazing to look at the right-wing media today. Now, in the near term, Mississippi Tea Partiers are definitely talking about splitting off from the Republican Party. They clearly feel that the divorce has already happened. In the very near term, they're talking about mounting a legal challenge against the results of last night's Republican Senate runoff. And so that may be next. There may be a lawsuit here. I mean, one of the conservative websites today, this one, Breitbart, they ran this long article today with tons of Mississippi-specific advice about how exactly Chris McDaniel could mount a legal challenge to the results of this race, which specific counties he should start his challenge in, how he should challenge the affidavit ballots, how he can request ballot boxes at precincts statewide and then inspect the contents, and where he ought to start and what the relevant legal precedents are for finding vote fraud that way and voting irregularities, and how we could get the election forced out, basically, in the courts. Of the election would have to be redone. It's essentially a long, detailed roadmap, all this really, really specific advice about how exactly Chris McDaniel should legally challenge the results of last night's election. Turns out the Mississippi politics expert source for all of that advice today is the chairman of the Democratic Party in Mississippi. Who, of course, would love for the Tea Party and the Republicans to keep this fight going. Hey, here's advice on how to do it. Do you need help bringing your lawsuit? We could help. Do you need lawyers? Democrats and liberals obviously take a lot of joy in watching conservatives and Republicans destroy each other. I mean, in political terms, this is the fun stuff, right? If your opponent is in the street setting himself on fire, the most important thing for you to do is nothing that might put out the fire. But in this case, with the tactics that the Republicans used to beat the Tea Party last night, and with the fact that it worked and the Tea Party got beat, and that has caused national gnashing of teeth and upset, not just in that state, but really across the country and in a very out loud way on the right. Is the Tea Party at a point where they are shifting from wanting to take over the Republican Party to instead wanting to oppose it? Schism.